Accelerating Transformative Pathways for Equitable Development in Small Island Developing States. We focus on environment, climate action, agriculture in Papua New Guinea, Asia Pacific region. Welcome to all participants who are joining us on YouTube as well as on Zoom. We're so glad to have all of you here. Thank you for being with us today. We're just holding on a little bit longer to allow all participants who are joining us on Zoom time to arrive. In the meantime, I'm going to ask I'm just going to go over some housekeeping rules to make sure that we all can have a smooth experience together on Zoom today, as well as on YouTube Live. First of all, my name is Irene Lauchaisri. I'm your technical facilitator today from Insight Pact. I'm joined by my colleague Amina. The two of us will do our very best to ensure that you all have a smooth experience on Zoom today. A few housekeeping remarks. The first is, as you all have done already, please, we encourage you to keep your microphones and cameras off unless you are speaking, intervening, asking a question. This way, we know for sure that all of our colleagues who are joining us from wherever in the world, regardless of the quality of their internet bandwidth, can see and hear everything clearly. So you are doing your colleagues a favor by ensuring that you keep your cameras and microphones off. Again, please make sure to keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Just letting in some other participants who are joining us today. In addition, please feel free to use the Zoom chat function to submit any inputs, comments, or questions that you might have about today's session. Our team will do our best to acknowledge them. If you're joining us from YouTube Live today, any questions that are submitted on YouTube's comments section will also be considered. So regardless of whether you're participating in Zoom or in YouTube, we will be able to acknowledge your questions. We are around 2 minutes past the start time at the moment. Some participants are still rolling in, so if our moderator doesn't mind, I'm going to give it maybe about 1 or 2 more minutes before we officially start. Again, for those who arrived a little bit later, my name is Irene. I'm your technical facilitator today from Insight Pact, joined by my colleague Amina. Our job here today is to make sure that your experience on Zoom is as smooth as possible. As many of you have already done, please keep your microphones and cameras off throughout today's session to make sure that we are not overloading anyone's internet bandwidth, as we have colleagues joining us from various locations around the world today with varying levels of internet connectivity and internet bandwidth. So you're doing all of us a favor by keeping your microphones and cameras off unless you are speaking. You're more than welcome to use the Zoom chat function to share any inputs, comments, or questions that you might have. We will acknowledge your inputs and comments on Zoom, but also if you're now joining us from YouTube, we will be acknowledging the questions, comments, and inputs that come in through there as well. Great. So we are about 4 minutes past the start time. It is now my pleasure to hand the floor over to our moderator for today's session. Gianluca, would you like to take it away? Yes, please do unmute yourself. Thank you.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning from Port Moresby. It's early morning. You can't see it, but there's a beautiful sunrise on Halifax Bay. Good evening for those in Europe, and good afternoon for those in New York. Today's session is on the theme of accelerating transformative pathways for equitable rural development in small islands developing states, with a focus on environment, climate action, and agriculture in Papua New Guinea. My name is Gianluca Rampella. I'm the United Nations resident coordinator in Papua New Guinea. I'll start with acknowledgements. It is my true honor to acknowledge the presence of Honorable Vera Mori, MP, Minister for Environment, Conservation and Climate Change, Honorable John Simon, MP, Minister for Agriculture, Livestock. Welcome. I'd like to welcome Dame Meg Taylor, Secretary General, Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat. She's joining us from Suva in Fiji. Dame Taylor, it's really good to have you with us today. Ms. Barbara Agate, Secretary, the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Mr. Connie Samuel, Secretary at the Department of Planning and Monitoring. Mr. Dauveri Henao, Executive Director, PNG Business Council. And Ms. Wallis Yakam, Executive Officer at the Consultative Implementation and Monitoring Council, representing I have a bit of turn, so I think it would be good if on the other side could be muted. Before starting, today we're going to have the following sequence. We'll have some opening remarks delivered on behalf of the Minister of Foreign Affairs by Minister Mori. We will have a short video pre-recorded by the Executive Secretary of UN ESCAP, and then we will enter into a panel discussion that we will limit so as to allow time for question and answers from participants worldwide. Let me just say 2 words before we start. First, this side event is a prelude to the presentation on Thursday morning PNG time of the first VNR, the Voluntary National Review of Papua New Guinea. It's an acknowledgement to the joint work of the National Department of Planning and Foreign Affairs for having led national efforts in putting together the first VNR, which will provide for fundamental data to take stock of the progress that PNG has achieved towards the 17 SDGs, but also important evidence as to the progress that PNG is making towards achievement of their own development targets embedded within the medium-term development plan 2018-2022. It will be Honorable Prime Minister James Marape himself presenting the VNR on Thursday morning PNG time. But today, to warm up all of our followers, we're going to be focusing specifically on climate change, agriculture, and environment. Just to contextualize and give you a bit of a sense, PNG hosts the 3rd largest tropical forest in the world, 7% of the world's biodiversity, and is at the center of the Coral Triangle, the global center of marine biodiversity. So if we just look at SDG 13, climate action, SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on land, well, these are all intrinsically tied to Papua New Guinea's role as a custodian, and let me stress this, as a custodian of global public goods. PNG provides for natural capital that is critical to providing ecosystem services for the whole world. I'll stop at this, and without any further ado, I would ask Minister Mori to please provide us with your opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning. This morning, I'm privileged to have my brother minister, the Minister for Agriculture, the Honorable John Simon. And of course, we convey our greetings to you, Excellency, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, Ms. Amida Alice Chapana, Excellency Meg Taylor in Fiji, and of course, our UN Representative President here in Port Moresby, Mr. Gianluca, and the moderators of this side event, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the government of Papua New Guinea, it is my great pleasure and honor to warmly welcome you all from far and wide, virtually and in person. For those of us in Papua New Guinea, who is high-level political forum side event, convened in an unprecedented way as a consequence of the evolving COVID-19 pandemic that we are all facing. This side event is a prelude to Papua New Guinea's first voluntary national review report presentation to the high-level political forum in 2 days' time, which our Prime Minister, the Honorable James Marape, will lead in person and in perpetuity. Let me acknowledge and commend our Pacific sisters and brothers from the federal states of Micronesia, Samoa, and Solomon Islands for joining us this year for the VNR process and wish them well. I know Samoa successfully presented their VNR last week and for the second time. Excellencies and friends, at the onset, let me express Papua New Guinea's sympathies and condolences to the multitude of lives lost and continue to be lost to the virus and the affected families in the Pacific, Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Europe. Our prayers, thoughts, and goodwill are with you and also with those who will be battling the virus. We stand in solidarity with you all as we together combat this unprecedented challenge. Papua New Guinea has experienced 11 cases so far, and all have fully recovered. This is mainly due to our government's early and decisive action and the valued support from our development partners, to which we are thankful. We continue to remain vigilant, but now we also have the daunting task of dealing with the virus, serious socio-economic and humanitarian consequences impacting all sectors of our country and population. A devastation that will take us many years to recover from. As the United Nations family marks its 75th anniversary this year, the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic and its dire impact globally provides a narrative for the important roles of multilateralism. As small island developing states, the support of the UN for us cannot be overstated. Excellencies and friends, we are grateful to the Economic Social Asia Pacific Secretariat and the United Nations Country Office in Papua New Guinea for joining with us to co-host this event. Our appreciation also goes to the panelists for accepting our invitation, and we are looking forward to your contributions as well as from the participants. The theme of today's meeting is focused on the importance of ensuring that no one is left behind, particularly in our rural communities in small island developing states, including my own country, Papua New Guinea, where the majority of our people still live. With the backdrop of the vulnerabilities and constraints faced by sides compounded fed up by the COVID-19 challenge, we are all facing now, and to build back better and ensure our rural people well-being and resilience, how do we effectively and equitably include and integrate them in our respective government's development policies and plans, and also in the rallying call for the Sustainable Development Goals decade of action? How many of our rural communities know about these development plans and pathways, and what does it mean to them to be equal nation builders whilst improving their welfare? It is from this lens that Papua New Guinea has decided to look at the nexus between agriculture, which forms the backbone of our rural communities, and the trade-off between conserving and sustainable use of our environment, and the necessity to address the onward dangerous march of the adverse impact of climate change on our people's lives and livelihood. Excellencies and delegates, also of importance is to ensure that we do not undermine the integrated and indivisive nature of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as a whole. Working in silos will be unhelpful in supporting the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. The interlinkage between all the Sustainable Development Goals necessitates enhanced coordination, cooperation, and partnership across different sectors to accelerate the implementation and achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. On this basis, Sustainable Development Goals 13, 14, and 15 informs the discussions we will have today on our theme of the nexus between environment, climate action, and agriculture. I will join my fellow Honorable Minister, the Honorable Minister for Agriculture, and speak in detail on the panel discussions which will follow shortly. Excellencies and friends, Papua New Guinea reaffirms its commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals and requisite measures, including alignment of needed support and funding within our means and capacity and our national budget, and will continue to be facilitated to support its achievements. Government alone cannot be able to successfully deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore multi-stakeholder partnership, including development partners, the private sector, civil society organizations, and faith-based organizations play a critical role. For Papua New Guinea, the real measure of the Sustainable Development Goals progress and attainment will be based on our rural communities' well-being, and we cannot take this for granted. We, however, look forward to strengthened partnership and new initiatives for transformative pathways that this event may generate to support and accelerate our national efforts to the support of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Once again, I welcome you all to this meeting and encourage a fruitful discussions. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Minister Mori, and thank you and the Department of Foreign Affairs for again reaffirming the commitment of the government of Papua New Guinea to multilateralism and to sustainable development and the SDGs. PNG is a true champion, and on this, I'd also like to acknowledge Ambassador Ray and Fred Sarufa that are connected with us from New York and are our strength and link to New York. We move straight away into sharing with all of you a pre-recorded message from Ms. Armida Alif Jabana, Executive Secretary of the UN ESCAP.
Excellencies, I'm grateful to the government of Papua New Guinea and the United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office for inviting ESCAP to partner in this important side event at the 2020 High-Level Political Forum. The theme of this side event, Accelerating Transformative Pathways for Equitable Rural Development in Small Island Development States, a focus on environment, climate action, and agriculture in Papua New Guinea, is very timely. As our 2020 SDG Progress Report has shown, Asia and the Pacific, including small island developing states, has made insufficient progress to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Lack of progress is especially striking on environmental goals, including ocean protection, biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable and equitable agriculture. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has shown what can happen when we neglect to adequately care for our planet. The emergence of zoonotic diseases is linked to increasing agricultural intensification, environmental degradation, and climate change. As governments in our region prepare stimulus packages to address the devastating socio-economic impacts of the pandemic, they have the opportunity to help us achieve a greener, equitable, and more sustainable world. Climate-friendly stimulus measures are smart choices for an economic rebound, offering the large economic multipliers in the short and long terms. Putting a price on carbon emissions and reforming subsidies for agriculture and fossil fuels can be effective, with oil prices at historic record lows. Green bonds can finance energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Outside of a few countries, green bonds are scarce in the Asia-Pacific region. Now is the time to capitalize on a proven idea to support a sustainable and resilient recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. Countries can also work towards improving domestic, regional, and international supply chain through enhanced digitalization to export agriculture produce to diversified markets. Targeted and well-designed fiscal and monetary support measures will be necessary in the short term to support affected industries, such as tourism and fisheries, particularly micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, providing employment opportunities to rural populations. Across the region, including in small island developing states, governments have scarce financial resources to apply toward recovery measures at the scale needed. Therefore, existing financial resources must be deployed to support agricultural development and related industries. The livelihoods of millions of people in our region, including Papua New Guinea, depend on oceans, forest systems, and the agricultural sector. It is paramount to implement measures that restore environmental balance towards sustainable ecosystems. Going forward, our socio-economic response could serve as a turning point for member states to create enabling policy and regulatory environments within an integrated framework that are more resilient against future pandemics and crises. ESCAP stands ready to collaborate with all of you. We are committed to encouraging stronger regional and sub-regional partnerships in creating a climate-resilient sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific. I wish you a very successful site event.
Thank you so much. And I think that the message from the Executive Secretary is a perfect segue into our panel discussion. We have 7 questions that we're going to try and answer within the time we've been given. We are running already 5 minutes late. We started 5 minutes late. I'll ask all panelists to stick to a maximum of 7 minutes per question, please. And we will start right away with Dave McTaylor. Dave McTaylor in Suva, if you allow me to go ahead with the first question, I'll go with it right away. Could you help us define the economic value of the Pacific marine conservation efforts? And can you tell us, based on your assessment, if you believe that the Pacific is on track to preserve the rich marine biodiversity of the Coral Triangle? And what can the Pacific Islands countries do to accelerate towards achieving the relevant SDG targets?
Your Excellency, am I unmuted?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, good morning from the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, and of course may I acknowledge the Honourable Ministers, Minister Mori and Minister Simon of Papua New Guinea. At the outset, let me reflect on what the Coral Triangle represents, and it's one of the most important reef systems in the world, whilst it occupies 1.5% of the world's total ocean. It represents 30% of the world's coral reefs. So the Coral Triangle directly sustains the lives of more than 120 million people. This includes the countries to the north of Papua New Guinea, Malaysia, and Indonesia as well. But it sustains the lives of 120 million people, including the 7 million people of Papua New Guinea. And indeed, the coral reefs of Kimbe Bay, Milne Bay, Madang, New Ireland have been the focus of significant studies on biodiversity and marine life. And the science determines the global significance of Papua New Guinea's marine biodiversity. I just want to focus particularly on the marine protected areas and the local managed marine areas. So Papua New Guinea has focused its management of coral reefs through the establishment of these marine protected areas and local managed marine areas. So whilst there hasn't been a creation of a large scale MPA, the smaller MPAs, the aim of that is to work with stakeholders and to build a capacity of community engagement and to create a collaborative approach in the management of those resources. This is particularly influenced by the land and marine tenure systems of Papua New Guinea, where traditional practices of tambu have been practiced in terms of seasonally protecting our resources. I understand from what I read from research that this is now slowly deteriorating, and this is because of the pressures on our communities for the demand of monetary resources and also their own greater utilization of these marine resources. So there are challenges and differences in views of with regard to conservation efforts. At the regional level, I hold the position of the Oceans Commissioner and work with the Pacific Ocean Alliance, which is made up of scientists, the crop agencies, governments, and civil society. So at the 2019 Pacific Ocean Alliance meeting, there was a consensus that the Pacific region and Coral Triangle were not on track with achieving its preservation and conservation targets. However, one could argue that there's insufficient data and method to measure the trend and outcomes on how we conserve our marine biodiversity. Existing data on the coral reef ecosystem indicates that only 0.14% of Papua New Guinea's total EEZ is protected. This percentage area is relatively small, and there is a serious commitment to protect biodiversity and natural heritage. Then there is a need to increase this. But in my view, this will require a concerted effort and discussion at the government and community level. And this is why stakeholder engagement is crucial in the establishment of MPAs. Just government designating that there will be a large MPA, in my view, is not the answer. It's making sure that our communities who have marine tenure are really involved, and we have systems in place where there is a participatory process by communities. But let me touch on what I think is a major deterrent to the health and wealth of the ocean, and that is climate change. We can talk all we like about how we're going to preserve reefs and fisheries, but if we continue to have the kind of CO2 emissions, and the ocean is the largest carbon sink in the world, then we have an increase of sea surface temperature, we have ocean acidification, we have coral bleaching combined with pollution of all types and overexploitation of resources that will continue to take a toll on the entire ecosystems. These factors entail that management and conservation efforts must be strengthened. But it's not just in Papua New Guinea, it's right across the Pacific. We are now seeing particularly the acidification of our coral reefs. On the economic valuation of our marine and ecological resources, yes, there are theoretical tools and means available to quantify the economic value of our oceans. And this has been evidenced in many studies that have been done, particularly with WWF and IUCN. We have valued our tuna resources in the region to $650 million US, and income over the last year has been around $350 million. However, again, the impacts on climate change on our oceans are rapidly impacting the sustainability and value of our oceans today. And whilst the ocean continues to be the main carbon sink, we're going to have problems. The Executive Secretary of UNESCAP has talked about how we should be looking at green bonds and how we can utilize green and blue bonds. And I would urge in this discussion caution, that we should be looking at instruments that we know that we can manage. and not instruments that may put us into further debt, which has been, in some countries, this has been challenging to manage. So aspiring for a secure future is going to demand some honest and sustainable commitments that are consistent with action. And Minister Mori has indicated that we have to walk the talk. The conservation targets and numbers are only guidelines for implementation and should take into consideration maximising the ocean benefits for both present and future generations. But I want to emphasise here that there is a split in, I think, in the dialogue in the region, in the Pacific region, around conservation, preservation versus integrated ocean management. And the way many Pacific countries look at development and protection of our ocean is that we rely on our oceans for our livelihoods. So there has to be a very, very well integrated ocean management policies so that we can sustainably manage our resources, but also provide conservation within that ambit. The balance between ecological, economic and social objectives, though, I would suggest that we be guided by a principle of intergenerational equity to make them truly sustainable. So we don't sacrifice the long-term ecological benefit for short-term economic gain, and we have to make sure that the future generations are protected so that there is something left for them when all of us have moved on. I'm very pleased to say that Papua New Guinea has a national ocean policy which positions Papua New Guinea as an ambitious ocean player and steward. This is a good step in furthering Papua New Guinea government's commitment, and while it's important to establish strong management measures, these measures must also be complemented with conservation measures to help ecosystems, in particular vulnerable and degraded ones, to recover and build resilience. Let me conclude by saying that from the Pacific view, and of course Papua New Guinea being very much a part of this, the ocean is inseparable from Pacific people, cultures and economies and societies. Indeed, 95.6% of our region is ocean. And together, Pacific Island countries are stewards of over 40 million square kilometres of the Pacific Ocean. So it's the largest oceanic continent on the blue planet. We have a long-standing commitment to sustainable ocean management and the use of conservation, including through the 2002 Pacific Island Regional Ocean Policy, the 2010 Framework for Pacific Oceanscape, the Regional Roadmap for Sustainable Pacific Fisheries, and the Framework for Nature Conservation and Protected Areas in the Pacific Islands region. And I think we and Papua New Guinea have demonstrated strong global leadership in calling for urgent action on oceans, which led to the adoption of SDG 14 and its targets, and we work to try to make sure that we meet those targets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dame McTaylor, and thank you for your leadership in the Pacific, in your role as Secretary General of the PIF Secretariat. I'll move right away to our second question, Minister Mori. What will it take for PNG to achieve green growth by 2030? And could you also comment on Papua New Guinea's sustainable forest management practices?
Thank you. It will take the Papua New Guinea government overall commitment to venture into green pathways road by acknowledging business as usual scenario and sustainable use of Papua New Guinea's resources as a developing country. This will also be including support from industrialized countries in terms of technology transfer, resource mobilization, technical experts exchange program, and advanced technology to assist a developing country like Papua New Guinea to follow the green pathway and sustainable practices. We are committed to take action to address these challenges, not only through efforts to adapt and increase the resilience of our people, ecosystem, economy, but also be part of the efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We presented ambitious commitment in our first nationally determined contribution, which build on strong domestic policies and targets to address climate change that forecast on carbon neutral and resilient society by 2050. The current enhanced nationally determined contributions, or NDC, will be revised based on conditional offer status to implement programs and projects under two main sectors in Papua New Guinea, which are forestry and the energy sector. The two sectors combined are the highest emitting sectors in Papua New Guinea as per the greenhouse gas inventory done in 2018. The two sectors will be our primary sector that the government must assess and make commitment to address the emission reduction roadmap and support the national determined contributions implementation plan in order to achieve its green growth by 2030. Under these commitments, we are building a portfolio of action that will deliver concrete changes in our development pathways. The government, in partnership with the United Nations Development Program, had developed a climate action roadmap 30 by 30 based around actions through SDG, or Sustainable Development 13, that targets progress towards all of the Sustainable Development Goals. This progress not only sets out a roadmap for action, but also highlights the need for an integrated approach to action on climate change. Now, this takes me to basically some of the SDG 15, which is our mitigation on land. And I like to basically highlight also some of the actions taken by the government. And that is that reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in developing countries, and the role of conservation and sustainable management of forest and enhancement of forest carbon stocks in developing countries, or REDD+. It provides us opportunity for Papua New Guinea to deliver emission reductions while securing the key environmental services that forest provides, including sustainable management practices, effective integration of REDD+ approach into forest policy and planning, as well as action across the environment. Agriculture and planning sectors will emissions reductions while supporting effective utilization of PNG forest resources in a sustainable manner. The concept of the approach will be enhanced in PNG national development, national determined contributions under the forestry sector. This section is based on conditional offer by PNG, and it will take a lot of effort to the partners and stakeholders to commit their share of actions to achieve this target. Papua New Guinea can only accelerate to meet such targets if our conditional offer to address within our nationally determined contributions through its implementation plan and roadmap. Furthermore, stated in PNG's 30 by 30 Action 11 emphasizes on internationally recognized timber legality standard, that is Papua New Guinea's timber legality standard and verification are, when fully operational, increasing information and transparency of forest products and increasing market access, while also improving standards of operations that will help reduce climate impact and ensure key environmental services remain intact to improve climate resilience. And action 12 emphasizes on increased environmental and commercial timber planning. With that, I'd like to ask you if you could put on those few slides so that at least just to emphasize the fact that we are walking the talk in actually planting trees in PNG as part of our mitigation process.
I'm working on it. Give me 1 second. Please continue. Please continue. I will show it in about 15 seconds.
Yes, the reason why we are doing that is that, as you know, there's oversaturation of carbon dioxide up in the troposphere, and it's about 42% above what is normal. And that it is contributing directly towards the warming up of the globe by 2 degrees centigrade. And that every country in the world, including Papua New Guinea, must make concerted efforts to reduce that. And we are doing that so that at least we can be able to come back to what would be, to reduce the actual temperature by 2 degrees centigrade by year 2030. This is a collective effort by all nations, including Papua New Guinea, and that is basically what we are doing. And we're trying to plant 10 million trees over a decade at the rate of 1 million plus trees per annum. These are gum trees, which are planted in the Chimbu province where I come from. It's a very mountainous, rugged terrain. And what we want to do is to convert the grassland into, at least to cover them with trees. And that those trees are about 2.5 to 3 years old. And as you can see, they're taking off fast. And I'm pretty sure that under our exercise, which we are undertaking, we would like to complete that over the next decade and have at least 10 million trees. And as you know, the trees take in carbon dioxide. And the only way to sink in carbon dioxide is to basically increase the capacity of the lungs of the earth, take in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen that you and I can breathe in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I'll move swiftly to Minister Simon. If we move to the next, given the government's ambition and platform to diversify its economic base, could you share with us what PNG is doing to stimulate growth in the renewable resources sector and to develop the agribusiness sector?
Thank you all, and thank you, panel. In PNG, to stimulate growth, we are looking at promoting SME and micro SME. And for us, the SME is the stimulant to growing the economy in PNG. And that is small to medium enterprise activity, which involves about 80 to 85% of Papua New Guineans, because they live in the rural sector, in the rural community. Over PNG's 85% of the population is unemployed, and they live in the rural sectors, in the rural places. This number of people, which is around more than 7 million of our population, they live in the rural sector, and they can be engaged in agriculture. And these are people that can easily be involved in agriculture where you don't have to pay them. Over 7 million plus people are unemployed, and they live in these areas. These are the people, and these are the untapped resources which we can use. And this can also support the climate change issue that we're raising. Like in Papua New Guinea, we have more than 200,000 square kilometers of land that is available for agriculture. We currently, right now, we only about less than 10% is being used, and we got more than that available for agriculture, and that could also support the climate change in terms when we plant more cash crop trees. And in the department, in Papua New Guinea Agriculture Department, we're looking at see if we can plant more than 100 million trees in major tree crops. And in order to do that, we would like to increase production in all levels as well in the PNG's cash crop industry. And that is for commodities such as coffee, cocoa, rubber, oil palm, and spice as well. The Department of Agriculture, through the commodity boards, aim to increase these productions. And we have commodity boards in all these sectors. And to introduce intervention in agriculture program, which will attract farmers to improve smallholder blocks and farms in order to increase the production level. We are planning to the plantations in Papua New Guinea currently. Currently, the plantations are owned by estates, they own sectors, big plantations. What we're planning to do is subdivide it and encourage block holders so that every Papua New Guineans can be involved in this, like where we're leaving no child behind. So you get every Papua New Guineans to be involved. And there's a lot of Papua New Guineans, they can be involved in this sector. While on that as well, one important sector is the research and development, which we must run together with it. Now, due to the climate change and all these issues as well, if we continue to plant and talk about replanting our cash crops, and we don't put emphasis on research and development as well, because whatever happens, whatever studies that research comes up with 5 years from now, will become irrelevant 5 years from now. So research and development needs to run together. So those are the areas that our government currently is sort of working together to make sure we put emphasis on research and development together with agriculture to get both of them to run together. Just on the same time, to encourage our farmers in Papua New Guinea to go into agriculture. You see, our people in Papua New Guinea are price takers. You got to make sure there's price for them. And if there is no price for them, they wouldn't go into this thing. So what we as a government is doing is trying to subsidize freight as well. And it's subsidizing freight and also the stability in prices. So we're working to stabilize price so that farmers can be encouraged to go back and farm the land. As I said, we have more than 200,000 square kilometers that is yet to be planted. And we want to plant this with our tree crops. And in order to do that, we can encourage more than 7 million Papua New Guineans to go back and do that. And in order to get them to go back and do that, we need to stimulate them by price, because they are price takers. You got to make sure the price is there. So the country, what we're doing is subsidizing them in terms of freight. So those that are growing our cash crops in places where roads cannot access them, we are assisting them to bring their cash crops out by subsidizing freight for them, and also to stabilize price so that they know that by doing coconut, which is copra out of coconut, at least they can get money out of it by doing coffee as well. So what we're doing is adding value to the industry by introducing to farmers the door price to the farm gate. So that's what we're trying to do in the agriculture sector currently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And it is a priority of this government to push country in the direction of development along the lines of agribusinesses, tourism, and fisheries. The opportunities are massive. If I can just remind the followers that PNG, as is, already caters, for example, for 10% of the global market for vanilla. And it just has 2 provinces out of 22 at this point producing vanilla. Incredible potential to tap into. If I may go back to Minister Mori, and I know that it's an area that is very close to your heart. Can you just talk us through your thinking and the government thinking on how we can move away from carbon fossil fuels towards low carbon dependence?
Thank you. Yes, definitely. We need to do something about it. We as a government, in collaboration with the United Nations Development Program, have developed the 30 by 30 climate change response roadmap. In that, it allows a broad spectrum of mitigation measures as to how we could reduce greenhouse gases and our contributions as a country. The plan outlines 30 sustainable actions that the government will enable to achieve by 2030. And the action plans number 6, 7, 8, and 9 of that particular specific 30 by 30 roadmap clearly demonstrates that and advocates this approach. Now, in response to the earlier question that you were asking, and also it's integrating these actions, which we are also continuing to update in our national determined contributions, where the contributions, coming from the energy sector and the forestry sector. Now, it is important that we address this because one of the product of fossil fuel, which is methane, accounts for about 10% of greenhouse gases. And the prevailing danger is that methane gases converts to carbon dioxide within a time span of 10 to 70 years. And therefore, it's already contributing to the oversaturated carbon dioxide. So it is critically important. And then I am glad that as a government, we have decided to basically bring in this policy so that we can be able to manage them. Those contributions in our national determined contributions is conditional on meaning support will be through partnership with private sector, bilateral and multilateral partners, multilateral agencies and development partners to achieve a transition to ensure 100% renewable energy by 2030 and an expansion and access to energy across our country. And I think it is important that I must elaborate here that we may be the only country in the world that could be indexed for the ecosystem, both green bond and blue bond. Our environment is so pristine that what you would want to aspire in what could be a pure ecosystem we find in this country. And the question rises, why should we be penalized? Why should we forgo development opportunities? And therefore, if we have got to address this, it is critically important that those developed countries that will contribute a lot to the emission of greenhouse gases must also be responsible to come to the aid of Papua New Guinea to realize our dreams for us to basically, if we have got to walk down the path to pathways to look for alternative energy sources. Having said that, we'd like to advocate the improvements in our hydropower capacity and development of new hydropower system, which will reduce the demand of diesel generation, while the rollout of rural electrification action has already been provided access to lighting up to over 1.4 million. I mean, where else in the world you would find this abundance of water, the source of hydropower energy? Here in Papua New Guinea, we receive a lot of rainfalls. We have huge river systems, and that it is readily available here in PNG, and that's something that we can be able to do, and we need the support from developing partners for us to actually achieve that. And we can even produce power, hydropower here, and supply to Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. You're perfectly on time, and I'm moving straight to my good friend, Daweri. Daweri, we've been working on this together for some time now. Could you share with us how have Daweri leads the PNG Business Council? How have businesses in PNG integrated and contextualized SDGs into their business planning activities?
I'll probably answer that question in three parts. The first on the shift between the traditional role of businesses as pure economic enablers to development partners, because that shift really changed the way in which the SDGs became an integral part of the business models of operators in PNG. And then the second one, I'll just give three examples of businesses that have measured the SDG investments, and that does provide some form of guidance on how these sorts of investment mapping can be useful in both a government to business policy making environment, and also within business to business investment space. And that would be my last piece. What is the way forward on these G2B and B2B SDG investments? So first of all, both Minister Simon and Maury challenged us in 2013, in 2012. What can you do to be a development partner to the challenges that PNG face? And back then, there were three basic issues that we were confronted with. We responded by saying we're pouring billions of kina into corporate social responsibilities. We were responding by saying our business models already mapped by international standards of ISO 13000, GNI, and as well as very authentic cultural science fusions that were operating out in the rural and also in the project sites that were blending active participation of folks in the market. And then lastly, the government regulations. We can do more if you can stop regulating and putting more licensing fees on us. But the change really happened in 15 because when the SDGs came about, especially for us, we found a international benchmark that did talk to private sector participation, private sector integration on development planning. Prior to that, I think we all know that type of environment on the MDGs wasn't inclusive of business participation. So we really took a dive at it, and in 2015 we worked very closely with Roy, your predecessor, and also yourself on where we could make those linkages happen. It actually became quite prominent when the new government came into being in 2017, when we really looked at what is the business priorities we can work with the government, and how can we make those business priorities synchronize with the SDGs. So this amounted to a 4 areas that we wanted, and we are working with the current government. Provision on infrastructure and basic services, government regulation conducive to business, productivity, employment, and broadening the industry base. We then underwent a SDG matching exercise on these 4 key areas. SDG 17 on partnerships for goals, industry innovation and infrastructure, SDG 9, SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth, and SDG 16 on peace and justice, strong institutions. Now, that fusion then allowed us to the confidence to then look at corporates that were investing in these SDGs. So Gian, what I'll do is I'll just highlight 3 companies, and they are very different from each other, and how the SDG investment mapping can give us some insight in where government business can make those partnership links, and even business to business. So I'll start with Steamships Trading. It's the largest, one of the large operators in the properties and logistics market in PNG. And an example of their SDG investment is Cradle to Korea. And this is where, through their partnership with the Barnett Institute, they're able to support a whole host of communities around the country that have stunting as a major problem. And so when you look at this investment, you're looking at literally an infant to 3 years old, where there is this investment that they partner with the Barnett Institute, and that addresses Goal 3. Then through Kokoda Track Foundation, you have the primary education component where they're focusing on SDG 4. And then they also have partnership investments with Australia Awards that particularly focuses on empowering women. So that's SDG 5. And then finally, in partnership with Pacific Towing, they have a program where the focus is on female graduates in the maritime sector that are given the preference on sea midmanship and also sea engineering. The other one I just want to touch, since we're talking about agriculture, is the Central Dairy Farm Limited. Again, this is quite fascinating because through the use of enterprise technology, the dairy business does not use large tracts of land. It's quite restricted in terms of its footprint, but that does not compromise the health standards as well. And so 100,000 farmers right across Central Province in the next couple of years will be literally providing feed to produce 20 million liters of milk. And that's a transformation exercise in the agri sector, using technology, using a smaller footprint. The final one is the Bank of South Pacific. 3 million account holders, a large portion of them came from a financial inclusion program. There's now a massive drive to make these account holders active business entrepreneurs. So fintech and widening the base is becoming a major source of their operation. So to conclude, the basic message here is we've had 5 years to assess the government to business linkage can happen. Private sector has already made the leap into embracing SDG investments. We're now at the cusp of utilizing data analytics so that these SDG investments, we can align it with major government policies such as the MTDP3, those that Minister Mori highlighted in the climate change space, and also the ones that Minister Simon highlighted. We are now in a place where we can say this particular business operator is well suited to partner with you in the implementation of this government policy. And the final one is within businesses. I mentioned a whole lot of companies linking with larger companies in the delivery of SDG investments. This is only going to grow. And because it's going to grow, we're going to have a flurry of information, data sharing, standards that we can all engage and relate. And that just improves the dialogue and the conversation on growing SDG investments. And perhaps through this confidence, we can see some of those bonds, some of those investments coming into the market, because people and businesses can quantify there is return. There is a return on investment if you invest in these SDGs.
Thank you so much, Leveri. I think you said it perfectly the way you closed it. There's been a huge shift from thinking SDGs from a social corporate responsibility, which was limitative, into seeing into SDGs a business opportunity. And I think that in PNG, we have some really solid champions within the business sector that have understood this and are driving it in that direction. It's simple. But not least civil society. And you have the best question. How do you actually hold all of us to account in terms of moving towards the achievement of SDGs?
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, everybody, and panel members, ministers. Thank you for inviting Civil Society, Department of Foreign Affairs, and UN to be part of this panel. First of all, I would like to say that, PNG CSOs take note of the impact of COVID-19, and we welcome this opportunity of the BNR to take stock of the SDG implementation at country level and look forward to strengthening in-country dialogue between the government and civil society. So I would like to firstly acknowledge the government and commend the government so far in terms of localization of the SDGs. This is really in comparing with the way we have implemented the MDGs in the past. Comparing that, what the government has done now is completely different. I think I would agree with what Doveri has just mentioned, embracing the partners. So partnership is quite significant in terms of what we are doing going forward with the SDGs implementation in country. For civil society, apart from that, for civil society, I would like to express my maybe some highlights, some of those views under 4 or 5 main categories. One is of partnership. The other is capacity building or lack of capacity of that kind of area. And then the other one is ongoing education and awareness. And the other most important or the 4th most important area is giving voice. We are talking here, and then who are we representing? Where are we in terms of giving voice to where it matters, and engaging them or giving space to them, and we in terms of effective engagement. Number 4 is governance and compliance. Number 5. So in those areas, in terms of partnerships and collaboration and dialogue is really highlighted or clearly articulated in our Vision 2050 SDG Strategic Development Plan 2030, and even in the SDG goal number 17. At country level, civil society, I think CIMs is one of those in terms of its network and the way it goes on with providing a platform for everybody to engage. So civil society, the Consultative Implementation Monitoring Council that I work with is in a way a partnership, providing a dialogue platform for those kind of things to happen. However, in terms of other partnerships with direct civil society and others, I would say that it's not as, we have a lot of areas in terms of improvement. Right now, as we are talking, the church health, through the health partnership, government funds the rural health services, and right now they're closing. So that's one of those examples of what we are talking about in terms of partnership. So overall, civil society in PNG is not really, doesn't have the capacity to have a level playing field generally. So in terms of ensuring that everybody is accountable, that's where we are. So I have to be frank in this. The only, the way to do, things like that is really like meaningful partnerships and collaboration. And how does that happen? You have to invest in it as well too. So civil society is embracing the implementation of SDGs, and that's really where the heart is, because it's the message is you leaving no one behind, and that's what civil society wants. But we need to make it, we have to realize what we mean by that as well. So one key message that key area that we need to improve in terms of going forward is, when we're talking about localization of SDGs, we must not discuss all those things in Port Moresby. We have to, I'm really happy that at least through the business side of things, you are working with some farmers and all of that. But right now, at the community level, people are feeling climate change, the impact of climate change, but they don't really know. So I think that's one area where we have to really aggressively look at in terms of ongoing awareness and education. How do we get them involved and engaged in this process? And embracing, churches. Churches have a lot of a bigger network, and that's something that we can utilize as well in terms of doing this through partnerships. And the other thing that I would like to highlight is giving voice. At the moment, you could see that in the past, agriculture development plans don't have really rural farmers' voice, and that's something that I would like to highlight here. In going forward, if we are looking at future agriculture plans, we need to embrace rural farmers and smallholder agriculture farmers. That way, at least we are giving them a voice. So right now, partnership initiatives by government are not visible and implementation is low. So one example of this is civil society in Papua New Guinea and government through the Department of National, or in partnership with the Department of National Planning, we've developed what we call the National Civil Society and Government Partnership Policy Framework. We would like that to be fast-tracked as well if we want to really realize what we are talking about in terms of partnerships, especially for civil society and government partnerships. Because that would really address the capacity of civil society and what we are talking about here. So I'll go straight to the recommendations that I have in terms of civil society. We civil society in PNG would like to recommend to the government that there is a need for revisiting the PNG Environment Act 2000 that came into force in 2002 and has been in operation for nearly 20 years now. However, PNG does not have the necessary environmental policies to enforce the act. So we recommend that the government must ensure to have the necessary environmental protocols are in order and in place to hold to account the multinational companies and their national business counterparts. Clearly articulate the waste management policy to include mine waste dumping. Include the voices of rural farmers and entrepreneurs, particularly those in the informal sector and in any agriculture future plans. Continuing of the freight subsidy that was recently introduced to address food security and to improve livelihoods of rural farmers. Revisiting the Forestry Act and cancel all illegal FCAs in the country to combat climate change. Fast-tracking of the national land use policy development and provide adequate resources to implement. Investments are needed in strong governance processes, particularly strong monitoring and compliance. There is significant capacity lacking in the key agencies that are mandated to carry out this vital role. So we would like to highlight that as well. Invest in tourism and agriculture, focusing on smallholder farming so that rural communities are resilient to climate change impacts. Change the development mindset from extractives to these sectors, which will benefit more people than a few right now. Invest in research and development. I would support one of the Minister for Agriculture and information management systems so that there is real data available to inform policy development. Conducting national assessment on agriculture to assess impacts of climate change and food security threats, and strong partnerships and meaningful engagements with non-state actors so that they have a voice. Okay, to conclude, we PNG civil society wish to bring to this panel that our people have the local knowledge, they know their history, their cultural, their current challenges, and with this should be the best place to create their own development pathways according to what they know through sustainable use of their own resources. Hence, the government's ultimate role is to empower and protect its own people to achieve those aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wallace, we would have not expected anything less from you. We knew that you would come in with a set of recommendations, and I'm sure you're going to check on all of us to make sure that there has been follow-up on those. And there is one thing that I would like to underline that you said, feeling the impact of climate change. Maybe we haven't stressed it enough, because the climate change in Papua New Guinea is not just a theoretical concept. It is being felt as we speak. Just for those that are not aware, the first climate refugees in the world were in Papua New Guinea, from the Carteret Islands and the Bougainville archipelago. And the changing climate partners as of Nino are having, on a routinely basis and a recurrent basis, impact in terms of droughts and flooding in relevant parts of the country with massive impacts on food security. So it is a reality that in terms of mitigation and adaptation, PNG is already grappling with. We have completed the panel discussion, and this is the time for the comments and questions. And I am not sure how, I think we're going to start collecting questions from participants, but I was hoping that I could give the floor back to Dame Meg Taylor, and I see her there, she's here with us, to share some reflections with us based on what she heard here from Port Moresby. Secretary General, back to you.
Thank you. Well, I've been taking notes, I can say that. Thank you very much. And I hope I can get a copy of everybody's statements because they're extremely valuable. Of course, the ministers have covered the positions of the government. But if I may, I wanted to say how very interested I am in terms of the private sector engagement in the SDGs, and having participated in meetings internationally where private sector has grasped SDGs and tried to apply it in their own businesses. But thank you very much for those examples that were given, and I hope that can be shared much more widely throughout the region. I'm also, in terms of the contribution from CIMC, and particularly on the issues that are really paramount to civil society in our country, and very heartened to hear that the government has made a big effort to embrace and engage in this collective dialogue to make sure that there is much more effective engagement with civil society. But if I may, and go back to both ministers' statements, and I think that we in many we as countries look at what is happening in our own communities, in our own provinces and nationally. But I think that the emphasis that I want to make, and come back to what UN Rep has said, is that the climate impact is going to have detrimental effects on everything that we do. And the leaders of the Pacific which is our Prime Minister in Papua New Guinea as well, they have said that this is the most important security challenge that we have in the whole region. Because what happens there was going to have a tremendous impact on food security, on agriculture, for those of us who come from agricultural growing countries, but then on those who are dependent on oceans, on maritime food supplies are going to be detrimentally affected. And I think these issues, we have to look at how we fit into this global regional context, and then how do we fit into the international context. Whilst Papua New Guinea tries to make tremendous efforts to move forward, my biggest concern is that there is no real shift in the way industrialized countries are dealing with this. Yes, you will get some countries in the European Union making very strident impacts on what their CO2 emissions are. But if you look at where the temperatures are going now, and we have said time and time again, we cannot afford to go beyond the 1.5 degrees, then we've got issues that we're going to have to deal with. And there is no conversation of really putting what has happened to the Paris Agreement, the 100 billion that was committed. All these issues are now going to have, now that we're coming out of COVID, industrialized countries have suffered, but they also, I think, are indebted to the developing world in terms of how we're going to find a way forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary General. Thought-provoking. Back to the panel. Your reactions, ministers.
Okay, let me start off. Thank you, Dame Secretary, basically for your comments, and that, and I also agree. I believe that the developed world has got they owe a debt of gratitude to developing countries, and especially like Papua New Guinea. We actually feel the consequences of climate change, and you know that we now are subjected to weather patterns that are basically influenced by the changes that is happening as a consequence of the rise in temperatures. This poses great challenges to our infrastructure, especially our transport infrastructure. In a situation where we have very prolonged dry and wet seasons, unlike in the past, where we have very distinct wet and dry seasons. But that also contribute to food security, simply for the fact that now we have challenges because we have production failures to many of our food cash crops, and that we need to actually basically address that, and that there is a dire need for us to establish a seed bank that could also that would ensure that we, as part of our food security measures. I think one of the things that I would like to basically also touch on is the fact that we also, as a consequence of changes in the temperature, we now have the rise of new airborne and waterborne diseases. For example, the drug-resistant TB. Germs and viruses are able to mutate and rearrange the genes simply for the fact that we now have a change in the temperature. So one way or the other, whether it be at faults of not of our doing, but as a consequence of contributions by the developed nations, we now have a daunting task to address these problems arising now. And it is only fair that those who are contributing heavily to the accumulation of greenhouse gases owe a debt of gratitude to countries like Papua New Guinea.
Thank you so much. Minister Simon?
Yeah, just a few things I'd like to head on is to support the climate change or to assist the, I said it earlier, Papua New Guinea, we have more than 460 square kilometers. And I want to re-emphasize on that. And our Papua New Guineans, we have more than 7 million people. That's like, they just need to be motivated to get them to be involved. And we have more than 200,000 square kilometers that can be planted with tree crops, actually. So in order for the developed nations to support countries like Papua New Guinea, where we can support the rest of the Pacific nations as well in terms of climate change, is assist us to grow trees, but grow cash crops trees. And we have that landmass that we can support, and all we need is support in our extension programs and in the programs that we are running currently in the agriculture sector. And one of the things that I see, which is a bit discouraging, is the freight, the movement of our farmers' goods within the country. And one of the areas I'd like to emphasize on is to promote cottage industries, the SME, and to have the short term is to have small cottage industries to go downstream processing. And our farmers, our groups can do that. But once they do that, getting those things out to the market as well is again pretty expensive within the country. You can't get those things out to the market, like get it to overseas market. Freight out of the country is expensive as well. And those are some of the interventions that we do. Then we encourage the farmers, because then you are really getting the prices. It's about promoting prices, getting the value chain, to the farmers, the farm gate. You get the door prices to them. That stimulates and that encourages them. Then when we talk about planting trees and planting cocoa trees or copra trees, coconut trees, coffee trees, oil palm trees, they'll go planting using the available 7 million plus people that we have that can go into agriculture, and the 200,000 square kilometers we have available. We just need to stimulate them, and they can start doing these jobs now. But there must be value for the sweat, and that is getting the right prices to them. And one of the areas to do it is promote cottage industries. But even if they do small industries, how do they get the produce out to the market? It's pretty still expensive, freighting it overseas. So those are some of the areas, if we looked at and addressed those areas, that will encourage more Papua New Guineans, as others 7 million plus, the majority of Papua New Guineans who are out there, to go into agriculture. And once they go into agriculture, they will plant more trees. We in the department, I'm looking at, I say, if I can plant more than 100 million trees, we can do that. And that's just about 100,000 hectares. We have more than that.
Thank you so much, Minister. I mean, there are a few things I'll take away from this. It takes country, value for sweat. Maybe we give 1 minute each. Secretary Samuel is the mastermind of development planning in PNG, so I think it's a good opportunity for you to share with us some reflections.
Yeah, thank you, moderator, and all the panel members. They've been very useful discussions, contributing to this very, very important agenda of sustainable development going forward. For Papua New Guinea, particularly when you look at the Vision 2050, which is the vision that we have for our country, which we would like to achieve a smart, wise, and fair and happy society by 2050, which is a massive goal and a bigger challenge for our government and our country as well. And when you look at it, Development Strategic Plan 2010 to 2030, with PNG would like to become a middle income country. And we are still on our way to achieve that target by 2030. And Medium-Term Development Plan 3, securing our future through inclusive and sustainable development for our country. So we have all this cascading vision 2050, DSP, as well as the Medium-Term Development Plan 3. And climate change is now the biggest threat for us to achieve those vision goals as well as the targets that we have in the medium-term development plan 3. And I think for us to grow the economy is in the next 5 years, it's not going to be affected by the threat that we are facing as a country in terms of the climate change. And I think the call for collective action is timely and extremely important for global community, for us to address the climate change issues at this stage. And I think Papua New Guinea is also happy to be part of those global community. Yes, we are also committed to the global convention as well as the treaties for us to work together, because I see that climate change will be the biggest threat, particularly for small island states, including Papua New Guinea. And if we have to progress on many of our development agendas, I think collectively we need to address climate change as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary. 1 minute each, Wallace and Daweri. Wallace go first and Daweri close, and then we'll give it back to Minister Simon for closing remarks.
Thank you, Moderator. Yes, I would like to support Secretary National Planning. Yeah, all those cascading planning and policies, how do we implement and achieve the aspirations is a challenge for all of us, and SDGs just can support that as well. So my maybe my last emphasis is really on partnerships. And the challenge that I see from outside point of view is that when you're talking about partnerships, government has to see those things as a whole of government. And even for SDGs or for the implementation of all these other plans, I see that whole of government is not there, and that's something that I think we should work on. Everyone has to partner with each other and make it as their own business to put together all that kind of stuff. Because I see environment sector, I think we have the environment sector is doing very well in terms of partnering with civil society in that area. But that must be also in the other sectors as well. And for embracing this kind of pressing issues, it should be really whole of government. And I think that's something that I will put it here on the table for us to take it as well. In terms of agriculture, yes, I can. Securing markets is very critical in that process as well, and also quality assurance. If you want to export and anything like that, you have to preserve quality, and that's something that the government has to work on. I see the evidence in Southern Helens where you have the chips factory in Yalevu and everybody's going into potato farming, and so that motivates. So when they see a market, people are motivated to do that. So those are kind of incentives that government has to provide, simple but responsive to needs of smallholder farmers at the community level, so at least they can be resilient in terms of climate change impacts. And climate change affects all of us, and therefore I think it must be seen to be whole of government agenda rather than something that's for environment sector or whatnot. But anyway, I'll just leave it
no,
like
Wallace,
that. Thank you.
You couldn't say it better. It's a whole of government, and I would say a whole of partners.
Yeah,
it is an issue that cuts across. It's multidimensional. It can only be addressed if we're able to look at it from all different angles and tackle it from all different angles. Now, very 30 seconds, and then Secretary again.
Look, one word, context. We can have all the 1.5 degrees Celsius targets. We can have all the policies that are inspired in New York and Suva, but context is primary in this discussion. We have already proven track record where private capital, government policy, and people on the ground have survived and have evolved into prosperous communities. And whether the confrontation will be climate change, other external forces like pandemics, context is absolutely critical. The great thing about the partnerships in PNG, it's not ruled on a line. It's very malleable, and it's in that space of consensus building partnerships that we can definitely achieve a whole lot of things. So from our end, it's definitely critical for government to provide that enabling environment on, first of all, on context, secondly, on partnership. Again, I want to emphasize there are things that we have done in the bush that's worked, and we can only improve and proliferate on it if we're able to continue investigating how that context is appropriate in PNG. I just want to end by saying many years ago, when I was a government lawyer at the Attorney General's, I coined the phrase invasive multilateral agreements. Because if the gatekeepers of government do not contextualize international norms, they will be highly disastrous for Papua New Guinea. That's why I do encourage officials and ministers that if we do not contextualize international norms for our usage, we will be putting more layers of burden in business as well as for our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daweri. Secretary Age.
Thanks very much, Gianluca. And just very quickly for me, it's great to see the panel having discussions on the SDGs, which is consistent with our national constitution, the fourth directive, national goal and directive principle on natural resources and the environment. Also on the foreign policy team on connecting for peace and prosperity in a changing world. Just wanted to highlight three themes, and that is the government sector, the social sector is already having discussions on the nutrition policy in Papua New Guinea in close consultation with our partners, and also already talking about developing policy on church and state partnerships. And finally, from me, it's important to ensure that women are involved in decision-making processes across all sectors as we talk about reaching the SDG goals for 2030. Thank you.
Secondly, this just prompts me to just acknowledge the commitment done by the government to the Prime Minister to ensure that there are special temporary measures put in place in the 2022 election with at least 4 seats reserved for women. Yes. The two of you from civil society and government are a living example of what having women at the helm means in terms of making a difference. We are at the end of it. Minister Simon, I'm handing it to you for you to close this event. Thanks to everyone for participating. Minister.
Thank you, everyone. In my closing remark, on behalf of my Prime Minister and the government of Papua New Guinea, I'd like to thank all the panel members for participating in this side of the event of the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Our dialogue was on the theme accelerating transformative pathways for equitable rural development on small highlands developing countries. Our focus on environment, climate action, and agriculture in PNG and Asia Pacific region. I thank my fellow government minister, Honorable Wera Mori, Minister for Environment and Conservation and Climate Change, Dan Taylor, Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, Ms. Amida Salsia, Executive Secretary of UN ESCAP, Ms. Barbara Hayes, Secretary for Foreign Affairs and International Trade, Mr. Connie Sembul, Secretary for National Planning and Monitoring, Mr. Davera Enau, Representative of the Private Sector, and Ms. Wallis Yakam, Representative for Civil Society in Papua New Guinea. And Mr. Gianluca, the UN resident representative of the PNG, and which is our moderator today. On the issue that we discussed today pertaining to environment and climate action covering SDGs 13, 14, and 15 and sustainable agriculture, which is more than SDG2 concerning food and security and nutrition. Agriculture cuts across all aspects of livelihood in PNG, more importantly, building a sustainable economy rooted in agriculture. While we are blessed with abundant mining and petroleum resources that has helped build our economy, those are unsustainable, and some of our practices are harmful to the long-term sustainability in Papua New Guinea. The way to the future for us is articulated in our national strategy for responsive, sustainable development, where we start to chart a new course for our development. A paradigm shifting away from consumeristic and capitalistic resource intensive development style, but one that is in harmony with our environment as well. PNG is a great opportunity to lead the way for sustainable development, as we are some of the plants and animals, both on land and under water in the sea as well. As a small island nation country, compared to the bigger countries, our very livelihood is threatened by the impacts of climate change. With rising sea levels, sinking of highlands, extreme weather patterns and events, and etc. The leadership we provide on these issues are important, not just for ourselves, but for our future generation, but for the whole of Pacific and the world at large. As a government, we have signed up to the most applicable conventions and treaties to protect our environment and secure a sustainable future and quantity of life. But we cannot do all this ourselves. Therefore, sustainable partnership is critical. Learning from the experience of others within and among countries, as well as range of resources and technical support by our partners, such as our bilateral and multilateral partners and regional technical facilities. More and more private sector partners have to be invited. And in PNG, we are grateful for the active roles that are being played now. And of course, our civil society partners continue to play a very significant role in service delivery to some of our most remote and vulnerable communities. The discussion we have today is part of the dialogue PNG had continued as part of the outcome of the VNR report. To advocate on the SDGs, we have done a great job in localizing and integrating them into the medium-term development plans and other key strategic plans and policies. The real challenge is implementation and addressing the bottlenecks, including tracking them. We hope that through this and the VNR process, we can build and strengthen our partnership and exceed the targets we have outlined in the MTDP and SDGs and ultimate Vision 2050 goals for Papua New Guinea to be smart, fair, healthy, and happy society by 2015. To conclude, let me once again, on behalf of my Prime Minister, our government, thank all our distinguished and panel members for your valued contribution to the discussion today, and all the participants who have joined us in this event. And I look forward to the main event, the presentation of Papua New Guinea VNR report on the 15th of July 2020, which is New York time, on 16th of July. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. God bless you. God bless you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.